The latest bombshell came from Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney admitting there was indeed a quid pro quo to pressure Ukraine, and that followed the brazen announcement that the president is awarding the G7 summit to his own Florida resort. And it was our Jonathan Karl who asked that question that got the extraordinary answer from Mick Mulvaney. He starts us off this morning from the White House. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Cecilia. Mick Mulvaney is the key player here because he is the official who the president directed to freeze aid to Ukraine. And when he responded to my questions, he was crystal clear about why the president wanted him to do it.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that. But that's it. And that's why we held up the money.
Acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney repeatedly insisted the president did nothing wrong. So the demand for an investigation into the Democrats was part of the reason that he ordered to withhold funding to Ukraine.
The look back to what happened in 2016 certainly was part of the thing that he was worried about in corruption with that nation. And that is absolutely appropriate.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happens as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. And I have news for everybody. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy.
Mulvaney's words, which he later took back, directly contradicted what the president has been saying for weeks.
But there was no quid pro quo.
There was no quid pro quo.
There was no quid pro quo.
And it seemed to confuse his allies on Capitol Hill.
He admitted that military aid to Ukraine was frozen in part to put pressure on Ukraine to investigate Democrats.
So Mick Mulvaney just said what you said?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know. I'd like to know what that means.
Democrats who have been investigating whether there was a quid pro quo pounced.
Things have just gone from very, very bad to much, much worse.
Mulvaney had said exactly what was going on. There was a quid pro quo.
All this unfolded as the president confirmed that his Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, a main player in the administration's dealings with Ukraine, is resigning. The reason, unclear.
Rick has done a fantastic job at energy, but it was time.
About 5 hours after Mulvaney's press conference, he put out a written statement that effectively denied saying what he said. Mulvaney accused, quote, the media of misconstruing his remarks and then said, quote, there was absolutely no quid pro quo between Ukrainian military aid and any investigation into the 2016 election. But that is not what he said at the press conference. In fact, when I directly asked him if there was a quid pro quo, he said, quote, we do that all the time with foreign policy. George, it was interesting that Mulvaney's written statement came after the president's outside legal team put out a statement saying that they had nothing to do with his press conference.
Yeah, and the Justice Department said they were surprised as well. It was such a big surprise to see him say that about no quid pro quo, but this press conference was called to announce that the G7 summit was being awarded at President Trump's hotel. Here's what Mulvaney said about that.
So we sat around one night, we were back in the dining room and going over it with a couple of our Vance team. We had the list, and he goes, what about Doral? And I was like, that's not the craziest idea. It makes perfect sense.
This was a pretty open admission here, and this is, I mean, it's hard to overstate this. This is something we have literally never seen before, a president awarding a huge government contract to his own business.
Yeah, now he said that they're going to do it at cost, and he said that they actually went through a process and looked at a dozen different properties and confirmed the president's recommendation to do it at his own property. It is really extraordinary and may end up being part of the impeachment process because it's the president being, doing what the Democrats have accused him of, which is doing something that appears at the very least to be for his personal benefit.
Yeah, self-dealing. Okay, John, thanks very much. Let's dig into that now with our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, and let's begin right there, Dan, because this awarding of the government contract to his own hotel potentially violates the Constitution in two different ways.
Right. It's called the Emoluments Clause, and it's one of these things that we've sort of put to the side as of late. Said, you know what? There have been courts that have dismissed certain lawsuits based on the Emoluments Clause. People have said, this is not going to be the issue that's going to bring down the president. And yet here you are with what seems like a direct violation of the Emoluments Clause. As you point out, two references in the Constitution. One is the Foreign Emoluments Clause, and that's a situation where no foreign king or no foreign state is supposed to give a gift or anything of value to anyone in the federal government without without congressional approval. But then there's the domestic one, which is actually more relevant here, which is basically says the president's salary is just supposed to be his salary. And no federal or state officials can give him anything of benefit. And the concern was that federal officials would be trying to, in effect, pay off the president, give him benefit. And so that's the one where you've got to say, if this isn't an example of it, what might be?
Right, and that's why it's going to be looked at by the Democrats in the House, no doubt about that. Meantime, this admission from Mick Mulvaney that there was a quid pro quo, this had been the main defense against impeachment by the president and his allies.
Right. Again and again, we would say, well, there's no quid pro quo. Do you need a quid pro quo, et cetera? And again, this isn't as much a legal issue as it is an issue for Congress with regard to potential abuse of power. Once you lose the quid pro quo defense, then the question is, okay, are we just simply saying it's perfectly fine to put pressure on a foreign government, not for something that's in the benefit of the United States, but something that's in the benefit of the president?
Well, and that's what Mick Mulvaney appeared to be saying yesterday, saying get over it. The question is, will all those senators and members of the House agree?
Well, and that's the key question is, watch the senators. It seems pretty clear at this point that the House is likely to impeach. And people keep saying that it's very unlikely the Senate will convict. Keep an eye on those jurors. Those are the jurors here. If they're angry at the president, as I would say in any jury selection, that's not a good idea. And there's no change of venue when it comes to where you can have this trial. It's happening in the Senate. So watch the senators, watch Lindsey Graham, watch others like him. They're critical when evaluating what happens next.
Dan Abrams, thanks very much. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.